What is up, guys? Mr. Vivarium here. We are with Carl Mazur. Some of you may know him from the various forums and blogs and things like that, and we are looking at his crazy cool bog garden that is right behind us.
Well, what got me interested in plants? Okay. I think the best thing was when I was a kid, like 8 years old. I think that's where it all started. I think like everybody else, a fly trap in the grocery store, right?
Yep.
And I made it a mission. I went and bought this plant. I brought it home, and I didn't know what to do with it. I thought it was some sort of tropical jungle plant, and I put it in the windowsill. Of course, it died. And even back then, I thought, okay, I got to figure out how to make this grow. So that's what I did. No internet, no nothing, no Google. So it was the library, and you look at the books and you start flipping through it. And I found out about fly traps. I found out they were from North America, which, wow, and they had winter. And I thought, wow, this is really strange. So I started reading about it and trying it, and growing them outside, and thought, wow, I can do this. And I grew a fly trap for about 3 or 4 years. And while I was flipping through the book learning about fly traps, I learned about other carnivorous plants, and that's kind of what got the bug going. And then I was telling you earlier, I went to the Pusslunch bog. That was the first bog that I ever went to. Yep. Saw pitcher plants growing, saw sundew plants growing. I thought, you know what, I wanted to really give this a try. So I started with a little turtle pool in my backyard, filled it up with some peat moss, put a couple plants in it, and that's kind of where it happened. And I'm going to say I probably stayed fairly low-key for years, and it wasn't until probably like the early 90s started, when the internet started coming out and people were starting to connect. I realized there were more people out there than just me that were interested in these plants. And that's when I joined the Carnivorous Plant Society, and just kind of snowballed from there, and started networking, meeting people like you, and trading, sharing, and this is what I ended up with a few years later.
Awesome. So what got you to think that you could plant these outside? Because lots of people will grow these thinking that they're tropical, like you thought with the Venus flytrap, and then they end up dying because they obviously need a dormant period.
And you know what? A lot of people confuse dormancy and cold winter with death. I don't know why. Even North American plants, even if they grow in places like northern Florida or the Gulf Coast, they still have a resting period. Right? It still gets cold. A lot of these Sarracenia that I have growing outside are from the panhandle of Florida, and it actually frosts there at points. So people think that these plants can't take, all they can take is a frost. Well, I learned from a very, very well-known carnivorous plant grower named Donald Schnell that once the ground freezes, and once they freeze, they're fine. What really hurts these plants as far as dormancy goes is shifting from warm to cold, warm to cold, warm to cold. So I remember him telling me, he said he lived in the mountains in the Carolinas at the time, that his winters are not very conducive to outdoor culture in the mountains, because sometimes it gets warm in the winter, sometimes it gets cold, and he loses plants that way. But he said, you know what, maybe you should try it. And I kind of thought about it, and that's when my wife said to me that you should get rid of your greenhouse. It costs way too much to keep this thing. Why don't you make outdoor bog gardens and give it a try? So I literally took a leap of faith. I took every plant that I had, I put it all outside, and I tore the greenhouse down, and I said a prayer and hoped it came through. In January the next year, February came, March came, and then everything looked good. April started flowering, and here I am 12 years later, not looking back. The plants have been out ever since.
Awesome.
Now, this is what I call a bog garden. Essentially, I've dug down about 30 to 40 centimeters down, and it's been backfilled with sphagnum peat, right? So big bales of peat moss. Yep. And the top, maybe 10, 15 centimeters, it's a mix of silica sand and peat moss. Why sand? I don't know. I mean, you could probably grow it in straight peat, but in the wild, in the coastal plain where these things grow in the southeastern U.S., it's a very sandy kind of mix anyway. And I think for the drainage,
definitely.
I think it certainly helps with drainage, so the plants aren't waterlogged. I think the sand lets the water permeate down.
So they're just moist.
So they're moist on the surface. It's wet underneath. It has a nice moisture content, but they don't sit in water. So I think that's kind of important. As far as actual culture goes, I've kind of stuck to a thing where I don't grow anything that doesn't grow in my backyard. So that's why I don't have a lot of other carnivorous plants. These all grow in very similar conditions in the wild. Fly traps and these pitcher plants grow side by side. The sundews that I have are either native or they're from the southeast. So they all grow in similar conditions. So they like a nice, hot, as much sun as you can give them. So where I am, I've got a south-facing exposure here, which is great. These guys get sun for most of the day, barring that maple tree. So at about 3 o'clock it starts to shade over, but they do get a good 8 hours of sunlight, and I think that's probably optimal. If you can get them a little bit more, that's great. But they like the full sun for sure. The other thing is wet. They do like the moisture. I'd never let the soil dry out. I've got a 200-gallon rain barrel there, and when we do get rain, it fills up, and I water it with rainwater, not tap water, as often as I can. But yeah, I mean, right now it's been really dry. We haven't had rain here in weeks, so I get the old garden hose out and I have to do it by hand. But other than that, there's really not too much to worry about. Come winter time, I mean, I leave these things out there. They harden off all by themselves, right, all winter long. Yep. I cover them with pine needles. You asked me about that before. Yeah. Where we are, we can have very cold winters, but sometimes we don't get a lot of snow. Yeah. So with a snow cover, you don't have to worry at all. I mean, I know, like I said, this guy in Montreal I was telling you about, he gets a ton of snow, and he doesn't do anything with his bogs. He goes out with a snow shovel and shovels the snow from his yard onto his bogs, and it keeps them insulated. For me, I put the pine needles on because if there's no snow and you get a really cold wind, it'll dry it out, and freeze drying will bring the end to these guys. So that's why I put some pine needles over. In the spring, it's really important too, while I'm talking about pine needles, is to take them off, at least where I am here in Niagara, in March, because you don't want the sun heating up the needles and trapping the heat and making the plants grow early. Right. Because then you can still get some cold, some frost. So I make sure by mid-March, all the pine needles are off, and yeah, it still snows, it still gets cold, but it's not nearly what it would be like in January or February. Yeah. And other than that, that's it. They just do their thing. This year I'm rebogging all these things. They're all coming out next weekend. Dividing them up because they do get very clumpy and they start to lose vigor at that point. Right. We get a lot of buildup of weeds. I mean, I try my best to keep on top of that, but you know, they got to go. So we're going to divide up the plants, put new media in, because again, it's a closed system, right? So you're going to get a lot of breakdown of the there's a word for that. Anyway, anaerobic decomposition. Right, that's right. So I pull the medium out. I put new moss in, new sand, clean it all up, and replant. And that's it. Literally maintenance free. You know, you come out here, you can see them, enjoy them, and you don't really have to worry too much about them. That was probably the other reason why I was happy to get rid of my greenhouse, because every year you're out there repotting and this and that. It was just began to be too much work. Right. This is no work. What are you looking at?
Guess we'll start off with your one Pinguicula, and then we'll move on to your other stuff.
Okay, this guy is a Pinguicula grandiflora. It's a European butterwort. A friend of mine out in you probably even know the guy, Justin, out in Vancouver or Victoria, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, he sent me that in the mail. I thought I'd give one a try. I've never grown Pinguicula outdoors before. Yep. And so I had this guy out here last year, and he's got a few little pups beside him now. So he's they form these little winter buds and they fall off and make new plants. So I think I'm going to be a little more careful this year. I'm going to pull off some of the new ones, and I'm going to create like a little area where I can kind of let them grow. Maybe put some rocks in there, because they do like little rocks and crevices to grow in. Yep. So I'm going to try those guys. Got back over here. I don't know if you can see those. That's Drosera intermedia crossed with Drosera rotundifolia. It's a wild hybrid that you find in Ontario a lot. And again, I'm not a huge Drosera fan, but I thought, you know what, again, I'll throw a few in here, see how they do. And they've been here for about 6 years, and they're doing okay. Awesome. This is something that a lot of people were surprised when I first wrote that Is that a tomato? That's a tomato. Okay, we don't need tomatoes. This is a Drosera binata form. It's multifida, I believe. Yep. Or that's maybe the true binata. No, multifida. And it's from Australia, or New Zealand, sorry, and it grows every year. A lot of people didn't think they would survive here, so I just threw one out here to see what would happen. It dies to the ground, like it doesn't do anything other than come back up from the roots, but now there's one here, there's another one back over there, and it does kind of spread. Yeah. Okay, so what you're looking at now is my Betta Flytraps. This is, I think this is how every carnivorous plant grower gets interested in carnivorous plants. I think it's the most fascinating plant. Seeing them in the wild is probably the coolest thing that's ever happened to me. I've been to about 4 or 5 different sites in the Carolinas, and to see carpets of these growing in the wild is amazing. And that's kind of what I decided I wanted to try to do here. Is just kind of let them do their thing. I mean, they flower every year, they seed, they drop their seeds, they grow. I just let them do whatever they want. I don't really care too much or try to keep them organized in any fashion. That said, I do have a few different cultivars in here that I can kind of spot and identify. This is the Sawtooth Piranha, it's called. Oh, okay. It's got a red tooth, and it's it's a red fly trap, but it has a little shark teeth on it.
Yeah.
These are the all green forms. There's a few of them scattered in here.
Yep.
There is also a few token pitcher plants. There's some purpurea in here and some hybrids. All those are Akai Ryu in the back.
Yeah, they're
all
really
the red
cool.
ones, yeah, they're pretty easy to spot.
Yeah.
And there is a B52 back in here. You can actually see the
Big
big traps popping
Yep.
up in there. And then the rest is just kind of random stuff. You know, whatever these things do as they cross-pollinate and set seed, they just kind of drop and
Yep.
turn into whatever they turn into. There's another sawtooth variety back in here. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. Now the other thing, I don't know if you can see these in your camera, is the orchids. One of the things that you find in the savannas where these plants grow is you find a lot of wild orchids. And I thought, you know what, why not? So one time when I was in the Carolinas, I grabbed a seed pod of these guys and just threw them out in here.
So these are different in the sense that with a lot of the tropical species that they need to be in super sterile conditions and then be grown up on agar and that because they can't have anything or else the seeds will just die. So I'm assuming these are a bit different?
100% different. They actually prefer a nice acidic medium. They don't grow epiphytic at all. You couldn't grow these like you'd grow a regular orchid on bark or anything like that. They actually need to be rooted in soil. And these actually, I was mentioning earlier, these are Calipgona. I don't remember the particular species of those, but we have these in Canada as well, but this is the southern version of it. These have 20 or 30 blooms per stalk, whereas our Canadian version has about 2 or 3 blooms per stalk, so you can tell the difference. But literally the flowers are almost identical. These are a little pinker. I think our Canadian ones are a little more purple. But other than that, they're pretty much the same. And they make great companion plants at your bog gardens. Adds a lot of visual interest, and
for sure.
Especially when they're in flower, it's really nice.
Yeah, and if you guys want to take a look at some of the wild ones we have here, I will link in the corner of this video my tour of Sifton Bog, which you guys can go check out.
All right, so I can talk to you about this plant. That's a Sarracenia hybrid. It's a Catesby Eye hybrid, which is purpurea on one side and flava on the other. And the neatest thing about growing hybrids is that Sarracenia is unique in the sense that, well, maybe not unique, but much like other plants, I guess, in the plant kingdom, but maybe it is unique. I don't know. Maybe you know more about this than I do. The children of a hybrid usually end up about 50% the characteristics of the parents.
Yeah, generally.
And you find ones that, come closer to one parent or closer to the other, but the majority of them are literally kind of half between it. So you can actually kind of plan what you want your plant to look like. Because if you know this one has a yellow flower and this one has a red flower, you're either going to get a yellow flower or a red flower, or you're going to get somewhere in between. So and as far as leaf color and leaf stature. So for instance, this plant here, it is a very red Catesby Eye. In fact, by the middle of summer, this plant will be completely red top to bottom. It has a giant flava-sized flower, much larger than a normal purpurea flower, but the petals are a very nice red, not the deep red of a purpurea, but not the yellow. So it's almost like a light red color that matches the plant. It's really a unique hybrid, and I kind of planned that one. I had a Florida red flava that I used as one parent, and then I had a pure red purpurea from North Carolina that I used as the second parent. And I got the red plant with the red flower, so it does exactly what you kind of think it would do.
Awesome.
So this was my first attempt at doing a multi-parented hybrid. I had a hybrid that I made years ago. It was a Psittacina, an albino Psittacina crossed with an albino purpurea, so it was what they call a cordyeye. And the other one was a Micheliana, which was a albino leuco crossed with an albino purpurea as well. So it had a common parent on both sides, which was the purpurea, which you see a lot of it in here. But you see there, you can get the little white spots on the leaves. So that's from the leucophyllum, the Psittacina. And this plant, because of its the parentage, the leucos put leaves out in the spring and leaves out in the fall. Purpurea pitchers year-round, as does Psittacina. So this plant literally looks the same pretty much from spring to fall. It doesn't really change. The leaves are a little beefier in the fall time generally, but it's just a neat plant. So it's got 4 parents as a hybrid. Okay. So this guy right here, he's pretty unique. This was given to me by a friend, and apparently, now again, I don't know 100%, but this is what I was told, that this plant was found in Baldwin County, Alabama in 1947-ish. And it was one of those famous botanists, I think the name was Ferdinand, that's the name that came to mind, but again, I may be wrong, so someone out there might know better than me and can post a correction on your video. But this original cutting, or this original plant, was collected in 1947, has been divided ever since, has been shared around. It's a hybrid between Sarracenia Flava and Sarracenia Rubra Weary Eye, and like I say, from Baldwin County, Alabama. And the thing is that in Baldwin County, Sarracenia Flava has been extinct for a very, very long time. So the fact that this has that as a parent is actually kind of unique. Kind of see the shape right between these two. They kind of got a lot of the same kind of shape to them.
Oh yeah.
A little bit of the same venation pattern. So that would be one parent. Okay, and this would be the other parent. This is Rubra Weary Eye. Unfortunately, these don't look good this time of year. These are their spring pictures. They're very small. They have a large wing on them. They don't have a lot of shape to them.
Yeah.
Come fall time though, like they will be a much beefier looking plant, more reminiscent of what you're seeing here. So again, you get kind of half of this guy. You can see the kind of the coppery coloring in this. That's kind of carried over into here, and then you saw the veins in the flava over there, which is kind of carried into there. Yep. And the picture shape is literally half between the two. Awesome. So it's a really neat plant. I like this one, and it's very robust. You know, they talk about hybrid vigor.
Yeah.
That plant grows clump after clump after clump. I can't tell you how many times I've had to chop it up with a shovel. Okay, one of my my favorite plants, I think, in my collection is Sarracenia Flava. It's probably the largest, one of the largest, most showy of the species. And the other really neat thing I like about it is the colors. It comes in a lot of different color variations, and especially when you start hybridizing them, you can get all kinds of different color forms to them. So I've got a little bit of everything here. This one is the Flavor Bar Flava form. This one's from Georgia, and it's got the traditional neck splotch in it, but is veined. Some people call this ornata, but this is more a Flavor Bar Flava. Ornata doesn't tend to have this. That was my phone. Doesn't tend to have the splotch in the neck. It tends to be just veined from top to bottom. So this is why we would call this a Bar Flava, or yeah, Flava Bar Flava. This is Flava atropurpurea. I don't know if you can catch that one in there.
Yep.
This is a particular cultivar called Wakama. It's not as dark as it should be here. There's a better one over there. But anyway, this is they call it a pure red flava. It's red from top to bottom. The only thing that doesn't tend to redden up is the interior of the nectar roll. It kind of stays this tan color year round. The other thing about flavas too is they show the best in the spring. Like, they're actually starting to downgrade. By the middle of July, they'll start drying out, and they're kind of much done by August. And then the fall time, they start putting up Phallodia, the winter leaves, and they're done. So this is probably the nicest time of year to see them. Okay, this guy here is Flava Var Maxima. If you look under the hood or you look into the neck, and there's no veining in the pictures at all, it's actually all green. A lot of people confuse these with an anthocyanin free form, meaning that it has no red pigment at all. But if you were to look at the base of one of these leaves down at the bottom, you can see there's definitely red in there. So it's not an albino, it's just a what I would call a veinless form. Very common, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. You don't tend to see these in the Florida area. These particular plants though, they were growing in a spot, and I remember this story, I was just thinking about this right now. In North Carolina, I visited with a friend of mine, and it's on private property at a metal fabrication place or something, I can't remember. Yep. But anyway, we asked them if we could go out and take a look, and they said, yeah, go out, go out, do whatever you want, take pictures or whatever. And it was a huge field of these veinless plants. And so I asked the guy, I said, do you mind if I grab a seed pod or two? Because they were pretty close to being ripe. But he said, yeah, grab a couple seed pods, take them home with you. So I germinated the seed, and oddly enough, in that particular couple seed pods that I actually got about 14 true albino flavas. Oh. They were completely anthocyanin free. The base had no red in it. It's completely green, like a Purpurea heterophila. Yep. And I wish I had one to show you. I mean, it looks identical. The only thing is that the ones that I had, I'd given a lot of them away, and I kept one for myself, and that was one of the ones that didn't make it through the winter a few years back. So I think there was one that was popping up over here, but I'm not 100% sure. But it literally looks identical to this, but it has no red pigment in it whatsoever. Okay, so we got 3 more color forms of Flava here. This one here is Barcupria, it's called. It's got this really nice coppery tone to the lid. As the season goes on, these will get a little bit darker. They're probably not as dark as they should be or could be, but you can already see the copper pigment showing up. This guy way back here, I don't know if you can see that on your camera right now. This one's what they would call Flava ornata. And if you can
look it up a little closer to the camera.
See that there?
Yep, there's good.
Okay, there's no splotch in the throat. It's just veins, and this is why they would call this one ornata. And just to your left, I guess on you, it'd be this plant right here. It's doing okay. I mean, it's not as colorful as I would like. This is Flava Rubra corpora. It's something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's the red, what they call the red tube flavas. These are they're actually endemic to a couple counties in Florida, and that's it. You don't see these growing in the Carolinas anywhere, or Virginia, or anywhere like that, or Georgia. It's only a couple counties in the panhandle of Florida around the Apalachicola State Forest. I think there's actually need to be more research into these guys because they're very different, I think, than the other ones.
So possibly like a subspecies or
maybe
something like that?
Maybe, because it doesn't grow the same. Like this will grow 1 or 2 leaves this season and that's all. Whereas some of these other ones will grow 5, 6, 7 leaves. And I don't know, color-wise, it actually even could be hybridized between like a red plant and a vein plant, and that's where it kind of came from. I have no idea. But it's unique to that area. You don't really find them anywhere else. And again, in the wild, you know, in ideal conditions, I've seen these things, you know, probably a meter tall and, you know, mouths 10, 15 centimeters across. Like they can get really, really big.
That'd be quite impressive to see.
It is. It's actually, in a whole field of those is quite amazing. Okay, one of the things that I like in my bog gardens are what I call companion plants, plants that you would normally find growing in the wild with them. Just to kind of add some interest too. Once the flowering is over here in the spring, we're kind of done as far as flowers go, and then it's just leaves. This particular plant is a Sabbatia, and I couldn't tell you which kind of Sabbatia it is until it flowers. But these were plants that were given to me from seed, actually, from a friend of mine in Virginia, John. And I'm sure John will see this video at some point, so shout out to John. He got me hooked on these. And they're a great companion plant. They start out nice and green, and they flower for about a month long in the summer. Beautiful pink flowers on them with these little yellow and white centers. They're really beautiful. John just sent me some seed of actually an albino version of this that looks the same, except it's got white flowers. But it grows really well. It clumps up nice. It makes beautiful flower displays. Seeds like crazy. So I mean, it's a very vigorous companion plant. And there's a lot of different varieties of Sabbaceous too. There's like, you know, the Dodo Condor, which I think this is the one. I got a filiformis variety over here, which you can't really see. The leaves are really, really small, but it has these beautiful clumps of white flowers on it. So we'll see that one in the fall time. But they're great companion plants, just kind of like the orchids.
Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to go see some cool plants that Carl has grown and actually see his journey from beginning till now, go check out his WordPress blog called Zone 6B. As well, there is a Facebook group where you can see Carl's plants and other growers who are growing these awesome things in the cold climate, including myself. And till next time, guys, God bless.